Welcome to Lobby Stories. Chapter 1. My name is Mark, and today should have been the happiest day of my life. After 2 years of marriage with Tina, I was finally going to become a father. I'd waited for this moment, dreamed of it. But that dream was crushed before it even began. It started with a phone call. The doctor's voice was distant, filled with hesitation. "Mark, there's something we need to discuss about the baby's health. There's a genetic disease. It's from the father's side?" My heart dropped. How could that be? My family, my bloodline, we had no history of genetic diseases. Confusion turned into a gnawing unease. The child isn't even similar to me, I thought, a cold realization creeping in. I demanded further tests, desperate for clarity. When the results came, they shattered my world. The child wasn't mine. I stood outside Tina's hospital room, my legs weak and my breath shallow. The weight of betrayal was too heavy to bear. My wife, still unconscious, lay behind the door, oblivious to the destruction she had caused. Tears streamed down my face, but this was more than grief. It was disbelief, fury, despair, emotions crashing inside me all at once. How could this happen? Why would she do this? We had built a life together, made promises to each other. I needed answers, but part of me was terrified of what I would find. Finally, Tina stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, locking onto mine. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt, but it vanished quickly, replaced by something far darker. A twisted, evil smirk spread across her face, a smile that made my stomach churn. In a mocking tone, she spoke. "How do you feel, Mark? Does your world feel like it's falling apart?" Her words were venom, slicing through me like knives. "Why?" I managed to choke out, the tears still burning in my eyes. Tina's smirk faltered, and her face twisted with rage. She slapped me hard across the face, the sting as sharp as the betrayal. "This is revenge," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "For Rocky? Rocky?" My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Rocky, her best friend, the one who had died just before our wedding. The memory of that night came flooding back. It was supposed to be a harmless bachelor's party for Tina. Rocky had insisted on taking her to a place in the hills. I had objected, it was dangerous, they would be drinking, and I didn't trust Rocky, especially not with Tina's safety. She hadn't been herself around him lately. But I hadn't been invited. I had stayed back, nervous but powerless to intervene. The next day, Rocky was dead. They said he had fallen, drunk and high, off the edge of a cliff. I had tried to move past it, but Tina never seemed the same after that. Now, standing here, her face contorted with hatred, the pieces began to fall into place. This is about Rocky?" I stammered. She laughed, cold and cruel. "He was my best friend, Mark. You didn't protect him. You didn't protect me." Her words made no sense. "He died because he was reckless. It wasn't my fault." I shouted, desperation rising in my voice. But Tina wasn't listening. "You stopped me from going to him that night," she snarled. "You controlled me, Mark. You didn't trust me, didn't trust him. And now, you're paying for it?" The room spun as her words sank in. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about us. It was revenge, something sick and twisted born out of guilt and grief. The child, her infidelity, it was all a part of her plan to break me, to make me feel the same loss she had felt. Tina leaned in close, her breath hot against my face. "You took everything from me, Mark. Now, I've taken everything from you." I stood there, my world collapsing, my heart shattered into pieces. I had loved her, trusted her. But now, all that was left was the unbearable weight of betrayal. Chapter 2. The hospital room was filled with the sound of Tina's laughter, high and wild, as if the sight of me unraveling was some cruel comedy. She sobbed between gasps, a twisted symphony of torment. Her eyes sparkled with malice as she relished every second of my suffering. I could feel her power over me in that moment, but something inside me snapped. I stood up, my body numb as I walked toward the window. The cold glass pressed against my palm, the outside world seeming so far away, so out of reach. Slowly, I turned back to her, a grim smile tugging at my lips. "Is my suffering really that amusing to you?" I asked softly, locking eyes with her. She paused, confusion flickering behind her gaze. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. "If this amuses you, then how much more entertaining will my death be?" The shift in her was immediate. Her laughter ceased, and for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. Her smug expression crumbled into panic. She sat up in bed, her fingers clutching the sheets, but the fear was soon swallowed by a familiar hatred. Before she could speak, I turned back toward the window, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. I didn't wait for her to react. Without hesitation, I leapt, the air rushing past me, a fleeting moment of release, and then, darkness. The next second, I opened my eyes. The blinding sunlight flooded my vision, warmth on my skin. I sat up quickly, my heart racing. The room felt familiar, Too familiar. I was in my old bedroom. Confused, I jumped out of bed, my thoughts racing. This wasn't right. The date on the calendar caught my attention. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it said. It was the day before Rocky had died. I stared at the calendar in disbelief. My fingers trembled as I pinched my own arm, hard enough to leave a red mark. The sharp pain confirmed it wasn't a dream. Somehow, I was back in time, right before everything fell apart. Without a second thought, I bolted out of the house, my mind racing. If this was real, if I had truly been given a second chance, then maybe, just maybe, I could stop it all from happening. I needed to see my parents. They had always been my foundation, my source of strength. I hadn't seen them alive since they died in that car crash, just months after my wedding to Tina. The thought of being able to hug them again sent a surge of emotion through me. I drove faster than I ever had, my hands gripping the steering wheel. When I arrived at their house, I barely had time to breathe before rushing inside. The smell of home washed over me, a warmth I had forgotten. My mom was in the kitchen, her back to me as she cooked, humming softly. My dad was in the living room, absorbed in the news on TV, just as I remembered. I couldn't hold back the flood of emotion. I knelt down before them, my chest heaving as sobs broke free. My mom turned, alarmed by the sound, and in an instant, she was by my side. My dad followed, his usual stern expression melting into concern as they both knelt down to comfort me. "Mark, what's wrong?" my mom whispered, pulling me into her arms. I clung to her, unable to speak, my tears soaking her shirt. My dad's strong hand rested on my back as he tried to calm me. I cried like a child, lost in their warmth, feeling the comfort I had been denied for so long. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into sleep, still held in their embrace. When I awoke, my parents were sitting by my side, their faces etched with worry. My head rested on my mom's lap, her fingers running gently through my hair. For a moment, I was just their little boy again. "Mark," my dad said softly, his voice calm but serious, "what happened?" There was no point in hiding the truth. They had always been my rock, and I needed them now more than ever. I sat up, wiping my eyes, and took a deep breath. The words tumbled out of me as I told them everything, about Tina, about Rocky, about the betrayal, about my death. To my surprise, they didn't question it. They didn't ask if I was crazy or if I'd lost my mind. Instead, they listened. My mom held my hand tightly, and my dad sat quietly, absorbing it all with the same patience he'd always shown. When I was finished, they nodded. "We believe you, son," my dad said, his voice steady. "And we'll help you. Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone." Tears filled my eyes again, but this time, they weren't from sorrow. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. I had my parents. I had a second chance. But now, I had to make sure I didn't waste it. Chapter 3. The day had finally come. Rocky and Tina stood before me, casually asking if Tina could join Rocky's bachelor party in the hills, just like before. This time, I didn't argue. I didn't fight it. I nodded, surprising them both, and said, "Yes." Tina hesitated, glancing at me as though she wasn't sure how to react. She had expected resistance, not permission. Rocky, on the other hand, smirked with that same cocky grin I had always despised. He clapped me on the back. "Come on, Tina," he urged. "At least we can do that for him." That smirk, it said everything. Rocky was a man who thrived on control, on feeling like he was the one calling the shots. I had always sensed it, but now it was undeniable. I watched Tina as she looked at him. The way her eyes softened, the subtle tilt of her lips, it wasn't the look of a friend. It was something deeper, something I had never seen her give me. My heart clenched painfully as I witnessed it, the truth unraveling before my eyes. Why hadn't I noticed this before? The signs had always been there, but love had blinded me to the reality. But now, I wasn't blind. I was determined. Throughout the trip to the hills, I watched as Tina clung to Rocky like a lifeline, her every move mirroring his. She was glued to him, barely sparing me a glance. The cracks in my marriage had always been there, but now they were wide open, exposed for me to see clearly. Rocky, ever the showman, played his part well. He laughed, joked, and acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary. But every now and then, I caught the way his hand lingered on Tina's back, the way he whispered to her when he thought I wasn't looking. As we set up camp, the night unfolded just as it had the first time. Drinks flowed freely, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and firewood. But this time, I had a plan. After one beer, I pretended to be drunk, slurring my words and stumbling toward my tent. "Mark's had enough for the night," Rocky chuckled, barely glancing in my direction. Tina didn't even bother to check on me. Her attention was locked solely on Rocky. It stung, but I swallowed the pain. I had come here for the truth, and I was going to get it. Earlier that day, while they were distracted, I had planted a hidden camera inside Rocky's tent. I needed to see what they did when they thought I was passed out, when they believed no one was watching. And now, as I lay in my own tent, feigning sleep, my heart pounded with anticipation. Hours passed, the night dragging on. Eventually, I heard the muffled sounds of movement outside. I waited until I was sure the coast was clear before slipping out of my tent and retrieving the camera. My hands trembled as I held it. Would this be the proof I needed? The final piece of the puzzle? The next morning, I gathered the camera footage and retreated to a secluded spot away from the others to watch. My breath was shallow as I pressed play, my eyes glued to the screen. The images unfolded before me, Tina and Rocky together in his tent, their faces illuminated by the dim light of a lantern. Their expressions were tense, filled with something darker than passion. Tina's eyes were hollow, her face drawn with exhaustion, while Rocky looked equally drained, his skin pale, his movements sluggish. But it wasn't just the weariness that caught my attention. There was something more. The connection between them, it was twisted, unhealthy, and desperate. Their dark circles, their drained bodies, it was as if the life had been sucked out of them. It didn't take much to guess what had happened between them that night. The intimacy, the betrayal, it was all laid bare, though their physical state hinted at something more than mere infidelity. There was a depth of self-destruction I hadn't anticipated. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Tina cheating. This was about something darker, something that had festered between them long before I had entered the picture. Rocky had manipulated her, fed off her insecurities, and Tina, in turn, had clung to him for reasons I still didn't fully understand. I stared at the footage, my mind racing. This was my chance to expose everything. To show the world their true colors, their deceit, their betrayal. But as I sat there, watching them in their vulnerable, exhausted state, a small voice inside me wondered if revealing it all would truly give me the closure I sought. The truth was now in my hands. But what would I do with it? For now, I had the upper hand. Chapter 4. When I got home, I couldn't resist watching the video again. My hands trembled as I hit play, but the pain still ached deep inside me. On the screen, Rocky and Tina were entangled in a sickening display of betrayal. Rocky was relentless, like a machine, drilling into Tina without any regard for the destruction they were causing. The sight was unbearable, but I forced myself to watch, to fully understand the depth of what had happened between them. Even after seeing it, the hurt didn't fade. But the betrayal ran deeper than infidelity. Before Tina's due date, she had demanded something that left me numb. "Transfer all your properties to Rocky's parents before the baby is born," she had said coldly. "Or I'll kill myself and the baby." Her words still echoed in my mind. I had agreed back then, too broken to refuse, and transferred everything, the house, the land, every last cent. I thought giving up my wealth might end the misery, that it would quiet her venom. But it didn't. That night, the final betrayal came into focus. In a whisper, Rocky had asked her about me. Her response? "Money is the only good thing he has." The words cut deep, but what I saw next brought fury surging through my veins. Tina and Rocky weren't just planning to rob me of everything, they had plotted to kill me and my parents, staging a car accident to erase us from their lives entirely. The crash that had taken my parents' lives wasn't an accident at all. It had been murder. My blood ran cold. My heart pounded with rage, the need for justice burning in every cell of my body. But I kept my composure, the plan forming clearly in my mind. They thought they had won. They thought they had everything, but I would drag them both into the mud, where they belonged. The wedding day arrived. Tina and Rocky believed they were triumphant, but they had no idea what was coming. In my past life, I had been broken by their treachery, but this time, I was in control. I had even paid a $1 million dowry to Tina's family, raising their status and ensuring they saw me as the perfect son-in-law. They sang my praises, calling me the best husband they could have dreamed for Tina. But beneath the surface, I was only waiting for the perfect moment. I stood before the crowd, watching Rocky's face turn dark with jealousy. He hadn't expected my generosity, my composure. It unsettled him, and I could see the unease creeping into his eyes. When the time was right, I called Tina and Rocky up onto the stage. Only Tina's family and close friends were present, a carefully selected audience, none of whom knew what was coming. With everyone's attention fixed on me, I calmly raised a remote in my hand. The projector screen behind me flickered to life, and before anyone could question it, the video began to play. There, for everyone to see, was the footage I had recorded. Tina and Rocky, caught in the act. Gasps filled the room. The image of their betrayal was unmistakable. Chaos erupted. Tina's father's face turned pale, her mother collapsed in tears, and the room descended into madness. Guests shouted in disbelief, and Tina's family scrambled to process what was unfolding before them. But I wasn't finished. I had hired a streamer to live broadcast the entire event, so the world could witness their fall from grace. Their dirty secrets, their lies, were now exposed for all to see. Tina's father rushed forward, falling to his knees before me. "Please, Mark," he begged, his voice shaking. "We didn't know. Forgive us." His mother followed, bowing beside him, sobbing. But I only smiled. "Everything back," I said calmly. "The house, the car, the property. And I want the $1 million in dowry repaid." Their humiliation was complete. They had no choice but to agree, nodding through their tears as they promised to return everything. Tina, who had stood frozen in shock, snapped. Her face twisted in rage, and she lunged at Rocky, clawing at him, hitting him with a fury I hadn't seen before. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice filled with hatred. "You ruined everything." Rocky, stunned by the chaos around him, tried to defend himself, but it was too late. The world had seen their true colors. As Tina was dragged off by her family, she crawled toward me, her face streaked with tears, her voice broken. "Please, Mark," she begged. "Give me another chance. I made a mistake. I can fix it." But there was no fixing this. I was done. Done with her, with Rocky, with everything that had once tied me to this misery. I had already let go in my previous life. This was just the final chapter closing. I calmly called the police, who arrived quickly. Tina and Rocky were arrested on charges of conspiracy to murder. They had planned my death and my parents', and now, they would face the consequences. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs, a strange peace settled over me. After a year of torment, my life had finally found closure. The storm had passed. 1 year later, I stood at the altar again, but this time, with someone who truly loved me. My life had turned into something beautiful. I was free of the past, free of the darkness that had once consumed me. And finally, I could live happily ever after.